You're listening to the Cyberwire Network, powered by N2K.
And now a word from our sponsor, SpyCloud. Identity is the new battleground, and attackers are exploiting stolen identities to infiltrate your organization. Traditional defenses can't keep up. SpyCloud's holistic identity threat protection helps security teams uncover and automatically remediate hidden exposures across your users, from breaches, malware, and phishing to neutralize identity-based threats like account takeover, fraud, and ransomware. Don't let invisible threats compromise your business. Get your free corporate darknet exposure report at spycloud.com/cyberwire and see what attackers already know. That's spycloud.com/cyberwire. President Trump signs the Take It Down Act into law. A UK grocer logistics firm gets hit by ransomware. Researchers discover trojanized versions of the KeePass password manager. Researchers from CISA and NIST promote a new metric to better predict actively exploited software flaws. A new campaign uses SEO poisoning to deliver Bumblebee malware. A sophisticated phishing campaign is impersonating Zoom meeting invites to steal user credentials. CISA adds 6 actively exploited vulnerabilities to the Known Exploited Vulnerability catalog. A bipartisan bill aims to strengthen the shrinking federal cybersecurity workforce. Our guest is Chris Novak, Vice President of Global Cybersecurity Solutions at Verizon, sharing insights on the 2025 DBIR. And DOGE downsizes and the UAE recruits. It's Tuesday, May 20th, 2025. I'm Dave Bittner, and this is your Cyberwire Intel Briefing. Thanks for joining us here today. It's great to have you with us. President Trump has signed the Take It Down Act into law, criminalizing the distribution of non-consensual intimate images, including AI-generated deepfakes. The law mandates that social media platforms remove such content within 48 hours of notification and gives the FTC enforcement power. Violators face up to 3 years in prison and fines. While tech companies and some advocacy groups supported the law, others, like the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative and the Electronic Frontier Foundation, warn it could harm victims and chill free expression. Critics fear the takedown process is vague and could be abused, especially under a politically charged FTC. Trump even hinted at using the law to protect himself from online criticism, adding to concerns about selective enforcement and legal overreach. Peter Green Chilled, a UK logistics firm supplying major grocers like Tesco and Aldi, was hit by a ransomware attack last week, halting order processing but not affecting transport. The firm is working around the disruption and updating clients regularly. This attack adds to a growing pattern targeting the UK's food sector. Recent victims include Marks & Spencer, Co-op, and Harrods, all of which faced system outages from ransomware. Cybersecurity experts warn that the cold chain's tight delivery schedules and complexity make it a prime target. These attacks risk not just operations, but also food waste and financial fraud through compromised communications. The Cold Chain Federation notes a surge in unreported incidents, while security firms say threat activity is only accelerating, putting the entire food supply chain at ongoing risk. Threat actors have been using trojanized versions of the KeePass password manager to infiltrate networks and launch ransomware attacks. The campaign, active for at least 8 months, was uncovered by WithSecure during a ransomware investigation. Attackers altered KeePass's open-source code to create KeyLoader, a version that functions normally but secretly installs a Cobalt Strike beacon and exports users' password databases in clear text. Distribution occurred through malicious Bing ads and fake software sites with domains mimicking KeePass's name. The beacons used carry watermarks tied to a known initial access broker linked to Black Basta ransomware operations. Some variants of Keyloader were even signed with legitimate certificates. One such domain remains active, still pushing the trojanized installer, raising concerns about continued exposure. Researchers from CISA and NIST have introduced a new metric called Likely Exploited Vulnerabilities, LEV, to better predict which software flaws are being actively exploited. Developed by Peter Mell from NIST and Jonathan Spring from CISA, LEV uses equations that combine data from the Exploit Prediction Scoring System, Known Exploited Vulnerabilities lists, and key dates tied to each vulnerability. The goal is to improve patch prioritization by estimating the probability that a flaw has been exploited. Unlike KEV or EPSS alone, which can be incomplete or inaccurate, LEV helps fill gaps by identifying high-risk vulnerabilities that might be overlooked. It can also gauge how comprehensive KEV lists really are. NIST is now seeking industry partners to test and refine LEV with real-world data. A new malware campaign using SEO poisoning on Microsoft Bing is delivering Bumblebee malware by luring users searching for technical software. Discovered in May by Cyjax researchers, the campaign targets IT professionals and developers by spoofing download sites for tools like WinMTR and Milestone XProtect. Threat actors registered typo-squatted domains, hosting them on the same server as Nairobi. When users downloaded from these sites, a malicious installer delivers both the legitimate app and the Bumblebee malware using stealthy techniques to evade detection. Bumblebee, linked to ransomware groups like Conti, connects to multiple command and control servers via the .life domain. This shift from targeting common software to niche technical tools signals a strategic focus on high-value targets with elevated system access. A sophisticated phishing campaign is impersonating Zoom meeting invites to steal user credentials, exploiting workplace urgency and trust. Victims receive emails mimicking real Zoom notifications, complete with company branding and a fake video of participants, prompting users to enter login details on a spoofed meeting page. These fake sites use subtly altered domain names to appear legitimate. Researchers note the use of personalized URLs suggests attackers may be leveraging leaked data to tailor emails, increasing believability. Stolen credentials are likely exfiltrated via compromised APIs or messaging services, potentially granting access to broader corporate systems. Experts warn this targeted approach is more dangerous than generic phishing and recommend verifying unexpected invites, enabling multi-factor authentication, and using email security tools and user awareness training to defend against such threats. CISA has added 6 actively exploited vulnerabilities to its Known Exploited Vulnerabilities catalog. These include flaws in Avanti EPMM, MDaemon email server, Sremax output messenger, Zimbra collaboration suite, and ZK Teco biotime. Federal agencies must remediate these issues by the set deadlines. CISA urges all organizations to prioritize patching KEV-listed vulnerabilities to reduce exposure to cyber threats. A new bipartisan bill, the Federal Cyber Workforce Training Act, aims to strengthen the shrinking federal cybersecurity workforce. Introduced by Representatives Pat Fallon, Republican from Texas, and Marcy Kaptur, Democrat from Ohio, the bill tasks the National Cyber Director with creating a centralized training center focused on hands-on, role-specific onboarding. The initiative would target entry-level and transitioning workers while also developing modules for HR staff to improve recruitment and hiring. The curriculum would be crafted in coordination with DHS and DoD. Lawmakers say the effort is in response to ongoing challenges in federal cyber hiring, worsened under the Trump administration by workforce cuts, hiring freezes, and program disruptions. Critics like Representative Eric Swalwell warn these actions have had long-term effects on recruitment, especially following layoffs at CISA. The bill seeks to reverse these trends by creating sustainable cyber career paths and raising training standards across federal agencies. Coming up after the break, Chris Novak from Verizon shares insights on the 2025 DBIR and DOGE downsizes and the UAE recruits. Stay with us. Compliance regulations, third-party risk, and customer security demands are all growing and changing fast. Is your manual GRC program actually slowing you down? If you've ever found yourself drowning in spreadsheets, chasing down screenshots, or wrangling manual processes just to keep your GRC program on track, you're not alone. But let's be clear, there is a better way. Vanta's trust management platform takes the headache out of governance, risk, and compliance. It automates the essentials, from internal and third-party risk to consumer trust, making your security posture stronger, yes, even helping to drive revenue. And this isn't just nice to have. According to a recent analysis from IDC, teams using Vanta saw a 129% boost in productivity. That's not a typo, that's real impact. So, if you're ready to trade in chaos for clarity, check out Vanta and bring some serious efficiency to your GRC game. Vanta, GRC, how much easier trust can be. Get started at vanta.com/cyber. Worried about cyber attacks? CyberCare from Storm Guidance is a comprehensive cyber incident response and resilience service that helps you stay prepared and protected. A unique onboarding process integrates your team with industry-leading experts. So if an incident occurs, your response is optimal. Get priority access to deeply experienced responders, digital investigators, legal and crisis PR experts, ransom negotiators, trauma counselors, and much more. The best part? 100% of unused response time can be repurposed for a range of proactive resilience activities. Find out more at cyber.care/cyberwire. Chris Novak is Vice President of Global Cybersecurity Solutions at Verizon, and I recently caught up with him for insights on the 2025 DBIR. Well, Chris, it is always a treat for me to be able to catch up with you. It seems on an annual basis to talk about the Verizon DBIR as it comes out every year. So welcome back.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be here, Dave. Thanks.
For folks who may not be familiar with the report, what's the premise? What prompts the creation of this report year after year?
Absolutely, yeah. So it's interesting because we've been putting the report together now for, believe it or not, 18 years. So hopefully everyone out there has seen and heard of it. But the premise of it was, way back in the beginning, people didn't speak about data breaches. It was a taboo thing. Everybody knew everybody was having them, but nobody admitted to them. And now, I think that landscape has changed a little bit, but the key here behind the report has always been, how do we take a data and evidence-driven approach to understanding, how data breaches happen, who they're happening to, why they're happening, and most importantly, and I draw a lot of analogies to healthcare, is, how do we learn from what's happening in the world to understand what controls, we need to put in place, what education needs to improve such that we can ultimately, mitigate and reduce the amount or the consequences or the impacts of these kind of data breaches.
Well, given where we find ourselves in this world today, were there any specific approaches that you and your colleagues took as you embarked on this year's DBIR?
I think probably some of the biggest ones are, the report has gotten even more global than it has been in the past, which I think, sometimes people may sometimes think that, Verizon, they think of it as being a very U.S. organization based on where we're headquartered. The reality of it is we have, nearly 100 data contributors to the report, all providing evidence and data to describe the various incidents and data breaches that happen. And the report has gotten even bigger in terms of the data corpus this year. So now we're up to, covering 139 victim countries, over 22,000 incidents, and over 12,000 data breaches. So it's one of the biggest, if not the biggest, data corpus that we've ever had in doing the analysis, which allows us to draw, not to say that the numbers being bigger means the situation's necessarily worse. I look at it more as the numbers being bigger means we have more data to draw better conclusions from.
Well, let's dig into some of the key findings together here. What are some of the things that caught your eye?
One of the big things that really jumped out at us, it was pretty alarming, was the increase in exploitation of vulnerabilities as an initial access step for these data breaches. It grew by 34% and now accounts for 20% of all the data breaches in the data set, which is, I think, very significant when you see it kind of creeping up on the heels of things like credential abuse, which, we've seen time and time again play a major role in data breaches. It's responsible for about 22%. Exploitation of vulnerabilities now makes up 20. So you see there that, there's a lot of 0 days, for example, being exploited as a mechanism of getting in. And also a lot of what we saw, which was really interesting, was a lot of those vulnerabilities are tied to perimeter devices. So I think, we often think that, we'll take the information and the systems and the applications that are most important and put them behind firewalls and VPN devices, kind of think of them as, behind the big castle walls. And now what we're finding is a lot of the 0 day and other vulnerabilities that have been exploited have been in those perimeter devices. So now that big hard castle wall we thought we had in front of our sensitive data and applications, it's got some 0 day holes in it, which is allowing the threat actors to get past it and get ultimately access to kind of that soft, chewy middle.
Can we touch on ransomware here? I mean, I think in my mind, at least recently, there's been sort of mixed messages on the ransomware front. With maybe people are paying less. But, what sort of information did you all gather when it comes to that?
So ransomware is still alive and well, unfortunately. So we've seen a still yet again an increase. So this year's report shows a 37% increase from last year in ransomware events. And what's interesting is, it was present in about 44% of all breaches, which is up from 32% last year. What's interesting is if you look at it and split the demographics of large businesses and organizations and your small and medium, there's a very outsized role that it plays in more of the small and medium-sized businesses. So it actually makes up about 88% in that SMB market, which tells us that the threat actors, and kind of like we probably always thought or assumed, they're mostly after financial gain and they'll get it from wherever they can. And if the larger organizations are doing, I'd say, arguably a better job in terms of maturing, implementing controls, what ends up happening is it puts pressure on the SMB market that maybe has not yet caught up or has not implemented those controls. The threat actors go where sometimes there's just that weakest link, and that may be in that SMB market. And so a lot of that is being hit with these ransomware events, and unfortunately, many of them not being well prepared to handle it are in a position of, they either have to pay or, some part of their business becomes, not operational. And, to your earlier point around paying, we've actually seen overall the entire data set, there's actually been a pretty significant shift. So if you look back 2 years ago, it was about 50-50 in terms of organizations that paid the ransom versus those that didn't. This year, what we found was it's actually now a bigger split, and 64% of the victim organizations did not pay the ransom. So I'd say arguably that's a little bit of an improvement in the sense that, if they're not having to pay or paying, that generally means that they've got more robust controls, resiliency measures in place to be able to recover from the event without actually having the payment be the vehicle to do so.
Oh, that's an interesting insight. We can't go through a report like this without mentioning generative AI. What were some of the data points that you all gathered there?
Generative AI. I've never heard of it. What is it?
I'm sorry. We just finished RSA conference. I meant to say agentic AI.
There you go. So generative AI is also one of those things that's interesting because in last year's report, we were like, what should we say about generative AI? What does the data tell us? And this year's report, while it's interesting in that, so generative AI definitely plays a role. The area that we see it most often causing problems from a threat actor perspective in terms of where they're using it still tends to be around the use of social engineering. They're using it to craft, phishing and smishing types of attacks. Interestingly enough, though, the large majority of what we see happening from a Gen AI or agentic or whatever AI flavor is the one you want to discuss, the majority of it is, I would say, self-inflicted. And what I mean by that is more organizations are still finding that it's their internal use, misuse, lack of appropriate governance or controls that's getting them in more trouble with AI than the threat actors using it against them. Generally speaking, what we find is when we looked across all the different entities out there, we saw that, for example, a big thing that stood out is, people using AI on their personal devices as a way to get around corporate controls. And then they will use that to upload corporate data to pick your platform of flavor, to upload corporate data to a Gen AI platform and say, share back insights with me, crunch this data for me, tell me what I don't know about this. And as a result, obviously, it exposes corporate, trade secrets and intellectual property. And obviously that, again, the example of kind of self-inflicted. And then the other areas where we still see a lot of issues is organizations that are kind of trying to roll their own Gen AI or agentic AI platforms internally, but maybe struggling to tie it in with things like identity and access management and authorization privileges, or even just generally doing things like, penetration testing to understand where there may be vulnerabilities and holes. The amount of times we get calls into our hotline asking for help because someone had built a platform. I'll give you a perfect example of one where an organization had built a platform for their internal use for HR purposes. And they said, look, we're going to load all of our HR data into this platform and allow it to be the first path for employees to get HR assistance rather than having to reach out to a person each time. They can ask a question to this platform. And if it doesn't have the answer, then they go to an actual HR rep. But what ended up happening was they had not figured in the security controls and authorization and access rights. So anybody could ask the platform anything, including, tell me who the highest paid person in the company is. How much does Bob or Nancy make?
Yeah. I was just thinking of, I was a half step. I'm with you. Wow. Yeah. Who could have predicted that, Chris?
Right. And just imagine where that goes from here. So that's why I say a lot of what we see right now is a lot of self-inflicted things like that, organizations struggling to manage it and people finding other creative ways. And I think what's also interesting is people are now growing more and more used to using generative AI and the various flavors of it in their personal life. They think nothing of just pulling up a ChatGPT or a Gemini on their mobile phone to ask a question. And so they expect, look, if I can do this with this kind of ease in my everyday personal life, I should be able to do this at work too. And that obviously doesn't necessarily translate. It isn't necessarily secured or monitored by the organization. And so there's a lot of kind of unintended consequences or unmonitored risks there.
As you all are tracking the trends from this year's report, what sorts of things do you think organizations should be aware of as we're heading into the second half of 2025 and beyond?
So I'd say one thing that I would call out is around third-party risk. We saw that third-party risk increased dramatically year over year. So it actually doubled from 15% to 30%. And the reason why I call that out is, third-party supply chain, especially with kind of the geopolitical landscape being kind of particularly frothy right now. Everybody's got a third party, and you probably have third parties of third parties. And so the thing that we're encouraging a lot of organizations to look at is not just what you see in the report here, which highlights this challenge, but what is it that you're doing in your own organization? When did you last evaluate what your third-party ecosystem looks like? And how well do you understand what their third-party ecosystem looks like? Are you doing things like, cyber risk quantification, for example, as a way to kind of understand not just what your risks are, but how do you prioritize the approach to them? Because we continue, for example, the 0-day vulnerabilities. A lot of organizations are struggling to keep up with the rate and the pace in which they're uncovering these. And now it becomes an important element to figure out, okay, if I can't do it all right now, I can't solve all my problems today, I need to have a really kind of smart and science-based approach towards prioritization of how I tackle them. So I'd encourage organizations to very much look into that if they're not already doing it.
That's Chris Novak, Vice President of Global Cybersecurity Solutions at Verizon. We'll have a link to the DBIR in our show notes. And finally, Kim Zetter's 0 Day reveals a potentially troubling new development as the UAE seeks to recruit former members of the Pentagon's Defense Digital Service who recently resigned in protest over interference from the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. Brigadier General Musallam al-Rashidi, representing the UAE's military, offered the entire DDS team jobs in Abu Dhabi to help build an AI unit for the UAE's Ministry of Defense. While the outreach came through official U.S. defense channels, the general's involvement with Analog AI, a firm linked to the controversial Emirati company G42, raises serious red flags. G42 has been under scrutiny for its ties to the Chinese government and military. Intelligence officials warn that hiring U.S. cyber talent could inadvertently transfer sensitive expertise or dual-use technologies to foreign powers like China. These risks are compounded by past instances where U.S. cyber operatives, recruited by Emirati firms, unknowingly engaged in surveillance and offensive hacking operations against U.S. allies and dissidents. Though none of the DDS workers have so far accepted the UAE's offer, they say this effort reflects a larger threat. The U.S. is shedding top-tier cyber talent, and foreign governments are eager to scoop them up. As one former DDS staffer warned, losing these experts not only weakens America's cyber posture, it opens the door to our adversaries. And that's the Cyberwire. For links to all of today's stories, check out our daily briefing at thecyberwire.com. N2K's senior producer is Alice Carruth. Our Cyberwire producer is Liz Stokes. We're mixed by Trey Hester with original music and sound design by Elliot Peltzman. Our executive producer is Jennifer Iben. Peter Kilpie is our publisher, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Hey everybody, Dave here. I've talked about Delete Me before, and I'm still using it because it still works. It's been a few months now, and I'm just as impressed today as I was when I signed up. Delete Me keeps finding and removing my personal information from data broker sites, and they keep me updated with detailed reports, so I know exactly what's been taken down. I'm genuinely relieved knowing my privacy isn't something I have to worry about every day. The Delete Me team handles everything. It's the set it and forget it peace of mind. And it's not just for individuals. Delete Me also offers solutions for businesses, helping companies protect their employees' personal information and reduce exposure to social engineering and phishing threats. And right now, our listeners get a special deal, 20% off your Delete Me plan. Just go to joindeleteme.com/N2K and use promo code N2K at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/N2K, code N2K.